everyone. Welcome to the Support for Caregiver Awareness, Learning, and Empowerment, or SCALE 8-week webinar series that aims to empower you with practical information and skills by enhancing your self-awareness and focusing on your own needs to improve your own mental health and well-being as a caregiver. My name is Cleo Landmetz, and I will be your moderator today. I'm the program lead for mental health and well-being here at the Ontario Caregiver Organization. Today marks the 6th week of the SCALE 8-week webinar series. This week's webinar topic is called the Self-Compassionate Caregiver, which will focus on managing your inner critic by developing your soothing self. I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Michal Goldstein. Michal Goldstein is a registered social worker working at Dynamic Health Clinic in Toronto, where she sees adults for individual, couples, and group counseling. She is also the founder of Creating Connections, a play-based therapy practice in Toronto, where she works with children suffering from mental health and behavioral challenges. She has over a decade of experience working with caregivers to support them in improving their ability to cope with the challenges inherent in caring for a loved one. Michal has developed numerous workshops and support group programs utilizing knowledge of interpersonal neurobiology and mindfulness techniques to support individuals suffering from physical health, mental health, and parenting challenges. She is passionate about bringing evidence-based practice to the forefront of the clinical social work field. Michal knows both firsthand and from professional experience the challenges that come with caring for a loved one with a physical and mental health illness, and is grateful for the opportunity to bring more awareness, education, and support to this community. Welcome, Michal. Thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you, Claire, so much. Today's webinar is going to focus on the concept of self-compassion and how we can incorporate it in our caregiving role to really benefit us and our loved one in this experience. So for those of you who aren't aware, the SCALE program involves a live webinar that we are on right now every Tuesday at noon. This is the 6th, I believe, of 8 sessions, and we also have online group coaching sessions. There is some availability still in these groups, and I recommend that anyone who's interested in these groups to still sign up, even if there is a wait list, because at times people do have to cancel at last minute, and then I can put you into that spot. And that's a forum where we're able to further discuss some of the topics this week, and really just mostly it focuses on giving you the opportunity to share with other caregivers, some of your experience and hear from them about theirs, which is, I've heard from the participants has been very helpful. There's also one-to-one phone counseling as part of the SCALE program. Right now, the slots are filled up till the end of the program. The program will be running again in May, and that will give you an opportunity to join that one-to-one phone counseling again. But for now, if you are interested for these sessions, again, if you can put yourself on the wait list, and then if there is a cancellation, we will make sure to put you in. Sorry, the group and coaching sessions and the one-to-one phone counselings are also available in French, and I believe there is still availability for those sessions in French. So as we said, this is week 6 of the webinar series. We've spoken about till now, and these, if you've missed any of the webinars, they are available by video. They've been recorded, and you can reach out to the OCO if you're having trouble finding that. But the OCO has a Vimeo website where these can be accessed. And I believe that it could be put in the chat, a link to that as well. So, what we've covered until now is we've talked about your caregiving journey, the stages of caregiving, what are some of the emotions that come along with caregiving, and how we can work through the journey of caregiving by working through some of these emotions. And so the following weeks focused on how does caregiving stress affect you mentally, physically, emotionally, and how do we manage some of these emotions that come along with it. Last week we focused on a wide area of mindfulness that can really address so many of the difficult emotions that we face as caregivers in a very different way than many of you might be used to, but really the expansiveness of mind of being able to kind of think about our thoughts differently and relate to our emotions differently was the focus of week 5 of that webinar last week. And this week we'll focus on self-compassion of, as I said, how we can relate to ourselves differently so that we can ease our burden of caregiving and our relationship with our loved one. In the following weeks, we'll look at finding your caregiving strengths. So really being able to recognize what are my strengths and what are my areas where I can flourish, and how do I help myself and my loved one flourish in their strengths. And the last week, we'll look at self-care and how we can incorporate so many different areas of self-care while we are caregiving, meaning in the limited time we might have as caregivers. So when we think about self-compassion, where we need to start is looking at what is kindness. What does it mean to be kind to another person? How does one act with kindness? What is a kind act, and what makes somebody a kind person? Do you think of yourself as somebody who is a kind person? To answer what kindness is, we need to understand what compassion is, because kindness starts with compassion, right? The willingness to bring good to others starts from a place of compassion, which is about concern for alleviating somebody else's suffering, right? When you go and think or have a desire to do a kind act, it's coming from a place of wanting to alleviate the suffering of somebody else. To be exact, the compassion is defined as a sympathetic consciousness of others' distress, together with a desire to alleviate it. So you're aware of another person's distress, and you have a desire to alleviate some of that distress. So now, rather than ask you whether you're a kind person, I want to ask you if you think of yourself as a compassionate person. Do you find that you have sympathy when you know that somebody is going through a difficult time? Do you wish often that you can help somebody when you notice that they're having a challenge? Or do you even just have a desire to comfort or show a caring word to somebody when you notice that they're feeling challenged or having a hard time? I can tell you from my experience with so many of the caregivers I've met through the program that, through the tens and tens of caregivers that I've met to date through this program, you can all very easily answer yes to that question. You are all very thoughtful and caring and considerate, and constantly looking towards the distress of your loved ones and incorporating that into your consciousness continuously, on an ongoing basis. Imagine a scenario that your friend calls you up and she just separated from her partner who suddenly left, right? After so many years together, all of a sudden they just said, it's over, I'm leaving, and that's it. I'm sure that as kind and compassionate people, you would respond, with something like, I'm so sorry that you're going through this. That's so hard. Things were going so well. This must be so confusing. You would respond in, in a way of trying to show care and also maybe support by saying something like, I'm here for you, anything you need, right? And that's because you're showing compassion to that person in that moment, right? You're showing an awareness of their distress and the challenges that they're facing in the situation, and you're providing support and care and comfort, right? You're aware of the distress, the specific distress they might be experiencing. That must be so hard. You've been together for so long, right? You're providing support and care by saying, I'm here for you, call me whenever you want, right? And that's because you're demonstrating to them compassion. Now, when we look at compassion internally, right? That same compassion that we demonstrate towards other people is the same compassion that we want to demonstrate towards ourselves. It's very easy to conceptualize compassion when we think about it as how we relate to others, right? Of course, you would demonstrate compassion to that person. Of course, you would be a support for them. Of course, you would recognize the distress that they're going through. All of a sudden, when it becomes self-compassion, we seem to have trouble. Many of us seem to have trouble. Self-compassion entails being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, when we fail, or when we feel inadequate. Rather than ignoring our pain and hurting ourselves with self-criticism, we want to interact with ourselves with a warm and understanding tone. Imagine if that same friend called you up, same concern, and she said, you know, I'm so sad. I can't believe this happened. Everything's so good. I don't understand what happened. And you said, what do you mean you don't understand what happened? Of course he left. You are just such a selfish person. And how could you even think that he was still interested in you? And of course he doesn't think that you're attractive anymore. When do you ever work out? Right? Can you even imagine yourself talking this way to somebody that you cared about? Or even if you're thinking some of those things, right? You might be thinking some of those things, but would you ever verbalize them to the other person? Would you ever express them and intentionally cause pain to the other person in that way? But strangely, this is exactly the type of thing we say to ourselves in such situations, or worse, right? Can you kind of think of, or notice or recognize some of those ways of talking to yourself that way, right? We're full of fault finding and critique to ourselves. And that's why it's so crucial to talk about self-compassion, because we, are very good at speaking to other people with kindness and compassion. But when it comes to ourselves, we speak to ourselves on a daily basis the way that, that last scenario I gave you of, harshness and critique that you could never imagine speaking to somebody else. So self-compassion entails being warm and understanding to ourselves. What does that really mean? It means the first step of that is being able to notice what it is that the person is struggling from, right? Take this scenario, and I want you to try to, as we talk about self-compassion, I want you to, try to go back and forth in your mind between, if I was relating to somebody else, whenever you find it hard to think about relating that way to yourself, you can switch back to compassion without the self aspect to it, right? So when we think about relating to our friend with compassion, we want to think about, okay, first I'm going to notice what was going on for them. Okay, what was hard about their scenario? What was hard about their situation, right? Imagine your friend came to you and said, maybe another caregiver that you know, and they're having a really hard time because their loved one is, often waking up at night and they're exhausted, and they find that they're not able to, complete all the tasks that they want to during the day, and they're falling behind at work. So we would notice what's the suffering that they're experiencing right now. They're exhausted, they're feeling overwhelmed, right? And you would respond to that with kindness, right? You would respond to that with kindness because you would recognize that they're imperfect, right? Your friend is not perfect. Your friend is not, it's not necessary for them to be able to accomplish everything all the time, right? It's not a requirement of life that you should always be on, 24/7 on your best. You recognize that we're human, and so we have challenges at times. And obviously, if they were just up the whole night, obviously they might need to lie down during the day, and obviously they might not be able to, make a gourmet supper, or they might not be able to perform everything the way that they typically would, and nobody would even think twice about that, right? So when we think about some of the, thoughts we have towards ourselves when we're going through a situation, I want you to, take a minute and think. You can even take out a pen and a paper if you're able to, and think back to the last time that you, quote unquote, messed up, that you did something that you feel, you made a mistake, you did something wrong. Maybe you lost your temper with your loved one. Maybe you chose, not to complete one or two of the tasks that you're supposed to complete in that day. Maybe, it was the way you interacted with your spouse or your child, maybe someone you're not even caregiving for, but just the way that you interacted with them. And, maybe it was last night when instead of going to sleep early, you stayed up and watched TV for hours and didn't, take care of yourself the way that you wanted to, or maybe you missed exercising when that was something that's very important for you, right? Any activity that you feel that you look back at that and you say, I messed up, in quotations, I'm saying, for any of you that are not viewing me. And I want you to pretend for a minute or write down for yourself to amplify that voice in your mind that was going on. What do you hear yourself saying about that mess up, about that situation that you wished you would have done differently? Do you hear things like, you're so dumb, why are you so mean, why are you such a bad daughter, spouse, parent, what's wrong with you, I'm worthless, I'm horrible, I can't believe I can't even do this, why am I never not able to, fulfill all these tasks? My mother would have done it better, my sister does it better, my spouse did it better, right? Put some of these thoughts down on paper. And when you read them over, whichever ones resonate with you, or when you think of them over, if you're not writing them down, tell me if somebody else said these statements to you, how you would feel about that person. When I even say them, it's hard to even say them out loud, because if somebody else was saying those words to you, you would view that as somebody who's being abusive, right? You would say, oh gosh, like, how can that person even speak that way to me? It's so cruel. It's so harsh, right? But we do it to ourselves all the time. We're always so hard on ourselves for the quote unquote mistakes that we make, or the times that we're not our best selves. And how do we switch that around? How do we start being kinder to ourselves? And the answer to that is by practicing self-compassion. It's a practice, right? It's not something that our minds do naturally all the time. It's something that we have to work at and shift our way of thinking about ourselves in order to accomplish that. So let's go through some of the steps of how we start incorporating self-compassion. So the first step of self-compassion is to notice your suffering, right? We talked before about, what creates that compassion towards our friends. The first step is noticing the suffering of our friends. And you see here the word mindfulness, because we spoke last week about mindfulness, about bringing our awareness to the moment and what we are experiencing in that moment, being able to notice our emotions in the moment and be aware of them, right? That's part of the practice of mindfulness. So when we're in pain about a mistake we made, when we're feeling harsh on ourselves for something that we've done wrong, or a current situation that we're in, we want to start by allowing ourselves to feel that. And that's why the mindfulness background is so beneficial to self-compassion, and why I can really yield self-compassion is because that first step is we need to be aware of what we're feeling in that moment, right? We need to name it. We need to recognize this is a really hard situation that I'm in, right? I'm suffering right now. I'm feeling really exhausted. I'm feeling really overwhelmed, right? And that's that noticing. That's that bringing awareness to what we're feeling and bringing it to the forefront and actually naming it. Okay, so that's that first step. The second step is now, how do we respond to that mistake? So, oh gosh, I'm feeling really awful that I just yelled at my loved one. So that's the noticing part. Now, how do we respond? How do we relate to that mistake that we made, or to that challenge that we're suffering from? This is really hard. It's really hard for me when, I'm my mother's getting upset at me, even though I've just, done so much to take care of her, or my child, being so rude in their interactions with me, despite how much I've given to them, and how much care I'm providing them with, whether they're a loved one that you're caring for, or whether they're, somebody in your life that is not your care recipient at that moment. In any event, it's challenging. So bringing that awareness. And then now, how do we relate to that? And what we want to do right now, we relate to that with such criticism, but what we want to do is we want to respond to these mistakes, to this suffering, to the pain of our imperfection, that pain of our imperfection. We want to relate to it the same way we would respond to our friends. We want to relate to it with kindness and care and concern, right? So, you've just one thing after another has just, one call after another of trying to, get a service provider to come to your home, and one call after another, it's not going well, and you're not getting the answers you want, or you're not getting calls back, right? So that's the situation that's happening. And how do I relate to that? If it was a friend that it was happening to, your friend would say to you, wow, that's so hard. You're having such a hard day. I can't believe that you're going through all of this. I can't believe that, he yelled at you after everything you've done, or I can't believe that despite all the care and concern you're showing, still, your siblings aren't helping out and they're not appreciating what you're doing, right? You would relate to that with kindness. So of course you're going to lose your patience after so many attacks from your loved one, or of course you're going to lose your patience when you try to call back and nobody calls you back, right? That's what your friends would say to you. And that's how we want to relate to our suffering and the situation and the mistakes that we've made, the same way that we would relate to a friend. And that brings us to the last step, is remember that you are human and that imperfection is part of the human experience. We make these mistakes. We make choices at times that we're, look back at and say, oh gosh, why did I do that? Or I wish I didn't do that. It's because we're imperfect. You are imperfect. We are all imperfect, and we will all make mistakes, and we will all suffer and have challenges and have severe pain. We all do. Nobody in the world is immune to that. And that's that human experience. It's relating to a global human experience of suffering and imperfection. We don't need to be perfect, right? So we can strive for improvement, but not for perfection, right? So we want to look at what are the environmental circumstances that are surrounding this situation, and why am I having a hard time right now, right? That's what your friend would do for you, and that's what we want to do, because your friend is looking at you and saying, you are not perfect, and I don't expect you to be perfect. But we're looking at ourselves as, no, you can't make that mistake, and I expect better of you, right? So it's the shift in perspective that's causing your friend to be able to relate to you one way and us to be not relating to ourselves in that way. Now, I know that some of you may be thinking, oh gosh, it sounds like a nice idea, but if I do that, isn't that just self-indulgent? Like, come on, I make mistakes and I can't do that. I can't just yell at my loved one. I can't lose patience. I can't, not take care of my obligations, right? I just can't do that. Won't that just breed laziness and permissiveness if I just continuously look at myself and I say, that's okay, and you didn't mean it? Won't that just cause me to be lazy? And if I tell myself this, then I just won't make any changes. I'll just continue to yell at my loved one, or I'll just continue to, let go of my obligations, or, just have to stay in bed a whole Sunday because I'm so exhausted from everything I've been doing in the week and I'm so run down, right? And you know what? I write these questions because they are the most common questions. And it leads us to the question of whether or not is there such a thing as being too self-compassionate, right? Is there such a thing as being too kind to ourselves to the point that maybe it will lead to some of these ideas? So to answer that question of can we be too self-compassionate, I want to give you an example of, we see on the screen a father reprimanding his son. So imagine a situation where a boy comes home from school with a failing grade on his math test, right? Imagine if the father replied to him, "What? You failed your math test? You are horrible. How could you how could you be so stupid? And I'm disgusted with you. And why are you saying you're trying? Like, how can you call this trying? This is trying. You haven't done anything. You haven't accomplished anything if you haven't gotten a good grade, right? If you actually wanted to succeed at this, you would, right? How motivating does that sound for you? Does that sound like it would, push that boy to have a drive and a desire to succeed in life and to do better at his work? It's possible that it could temporarily motivate him. It's possible that, the fear of the reprimand might help him, for the next math test, do better. But it doesn't sound like such a foolproof way to get him to be an A student, right? Because what does it actually cause in this boy? It causes him to feel bad about himself, which could actually lead to depression, right? It causes him to be afraid of failing because if he fails, if he makes some mistakes, there are serious consequences of failing. So either I'm not going to try, or I'm going to push myself in a way that's not actually healthy for me, right? And the other thing it does is it causes a loss of confidence in yourself, right? Because, the message the father is giving is if you don't do 100%, if you don't show significant success, then your efforts don't really matter. And there's no worthwhile benefit to that, right? I'm sure that, I know for myself, even like I said before, even saying those words, is hard to imagine, a parent talking to a child that way. And unfortunately, there are relationships out there where, parents are criticizing children in that way. But, as standing outside of it, we can all look at the situation and very easily say, how does that father think he's helping his kid by, being that harsh to him, right? How we would hope the father would respond, or, rather what a compassionate way of responding would be, wow, you must be so disappointed with what happened. I know that you really were trying to do your best in this situation. You got up, you got your books ready, you sat down, you reviewed it last night, and, everybody struggles with things, and, you didn't do so well this time, but you'll do better next time. And what can I do? What can I do to help you do better? What can we do together to ensure that next time you can do things differently, or the outcome might look differently, right? That would be a compassionate way for this father to respond. He would notice the suffering that his son is experiencing in that moment from having done poorly on the test. He's relating to him with kindness and compassion, and he's recognizing the fact that he is imperfect, as we all are. So, when we look at this scenario, and back to our questions from before, we're not permitting negative character traits or making excuses for wrong behavior when we're self-compassionate, but rather we're recognizing the challenge is inherent in being a human being, right? And we're looking for ways to improve our situation, right? So I just want to repeat that. We're not permitting negative character traits by being self-compassionate. We're not making excuses for wrong behavior by being self-compassionate. We're simply recognizing our humanity, our being part of a human experience, and we're finding ways to try to improve our situations with kindness and concern. So in case I didn't kind of convince you yet about the benefits of and the importance of self-compassion, I want to look for a minute at the physiology of self-criticism versus self-compassion. So if you recall, in previous weeks, we were talking about the stress response and how our body has a natural response system to danger, right? So on the screen, we have an animal, a predator chasing another animal, and our stress response system that we have in our body is, the same, as we spoke about, whether or not biologically we are wired the same, whether or not a outside external stressor is a physical one, like physical danger that we have to run away from, or an emotional one based on ongoing stressful situations or stressful interactions. And when we criticize ourselves, what we know scientifically is that when we criticize ourselves, we are actually biologically tapping into our body's threat and defense system. And so when we talk about, that boy, and perhaps there would be a temporary shift, that temporary shift comes from that body's threat and defense system being activated, right? So for the short term, yes, that stress response will get you out of that situation right now or for the next day or week, right? But if you remember, talking about this fight or flight mode, that being in that fight or flight mode creates significant stress on our body and our mind. And it puts us in a position that we are actually less able to make changes and use our cognitive abilities to the same way, right? So recognizing that self-criticism is actually triggering our body the same way like a perceived threat is, the same way like our stressful interactions with our loved one are, the same way that trauma triggers our body. That's what's being activated when we're self-critical. Now, compassion, on the other hand, including self-compassion, is actually linked to something called the mammalian care system. So part of our innate nature is that signs of compassion, signs of care, when we're shown care, that activates our care system, which is part of our, releases pleasure hormones in our minds, and which is part of that kicks in that parasympathetic nervous system that we were talking in previous weeks, right? So when we're compassionate to ourselves, when we feel inadequate or upset about mistakes we made, that compassion that we can show ourselves actually helps us feel safe and cared for, right? Like a child being held in a warm embrace from its parent. It's self-compassion actually helps to undo our threat response, activate our care system, release endorphins and oxytocin, reduce stress, and increase feelings of safety and security. So that parasympathetic nervous system that we were talking about last week, how do we activate this? How do we gear this system into action? Because that's what's going to help us be able to function better in our lives and experience less stress and be less triggered by different situations. This correlation of self-criticism, self-compassion, it plays that same activation in our minds, right? So we choose self-criticism because in the moment, it feels like that's going to get us moving. But when we look at it from a biological standpoint, we see that actually it might temporarily get us moving, but long-term, it's actually harming us. And the way that we can switch that around is by utilizing our care system, utilizing our ability to care for ourselves and to show care and concern for ourselves, and in turn activate our internal care system, which activates the converse of the stress response system, which is really what we want to be able to do for ourselves. Self-compassion is about self-acceptance, right? When we talk about our imperfections, it means that I'm accepting myself, my flaws, and all, right? Not just, my ability to do, but every aspect of me. Carl Rogers says the curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change. If you think of what's happening there, right, in that quote, when we embrace ourselves, our flaws, and all, then it's safe to see ourselves clearly and be able to really look at ourselves more honestly and more vulnerably, in a way that we can actually experience every aspect of ourselves and not just the parts that we do well, right? But all the aspects of ourselves. So we're going to try as much as possible to make changes in terms of how we want to communicate with ourselves. We want to look at what are the areas, what I said before, if you wanted to write down, what are the types of things that we're saying to ourselves, and how can we relate to those things with more care and concern and self-compassion. But this image on the screen of a watering can is to bring attention to the fact that self-compassion is motivating, because it's like planting seeds, right? You're worthy regardless of whether you succeed. You've done great and you've tried the best you can. Look at how much you're going through, right? That doesn't, shift our entire attention. That doesn't create a situation where we're not struggling. But what it does is plant seeds of, I'd really like to be happier. I'd really like to be more caring. I'd really like to have more patience with my loved one. And those are the seeds that you're planting and watering with self-compassion, because we know at the root of that being, critical of ourselves is a true kindness and a desire to do for your loved one, right? It's not that you don't want to do, and that's why you're losing your temper or not, fulfilling all the tasks that you want to complete in the day. It's coming from a place of, wanting to be happy, wanting to be more caring, wanting to be more patient. And what self-compassion does is water those seeds and allow them to actualize themselves, because we're looking at our whole self, and that's where we're able to make changes, and that's where we can really flourish. So how do we incorporate, these concepts of self-compassion into our lives on even a daily basis? So I'm just going to bring up a few different ways that you can do this, and take notes on whatever speaks to you. So one example is taking a self-compassionate break. So what that means is, if you think of a situation in your life that's difficult for you or that's causing you stress, and you call the situation to mind, see if you can actually, what you want to do in this exercise is take a pause in your day, set aside a time where you're taking and, putting it in your calendar, a self-compassion break. And you want to bring to mind, what's this concerning thing that's happening in my life? What's this situation that's causing me distress, with relation to something I've done or a choice I've made, or something I feel like I'm not able to do. And you want to actually call attention to the situation in your mind and see if you can actually feel in your body and in your mind the discomfort of that situation. And what you want to say to yourself in that moment is, this is a moment of suffering. That's the mindfulness piece that we spoke about before, right? That's step one. This is a moment of suffering. This is stressful. This hurts. I'm exhausted, right? Something that we're recognizing the suffering that we're physically even experiencing by just the thought of this stressful situation. The second thing we want to tell ourselves in that moment is, suffering is a part of life. So the first statement is, this is a moment of suffering. The second is, suffering is a part of life, right? That's that common humanity piece that we were speaking about before. Another example, rather than saying suffering is a part of life, you can say, other people feel this way. I'm not alone. We all struggle in our lives, right? Those are some examples. And you can come up with your own, what speaks to you, what shows you, what places you within the context of humanity, right? So the first step is recognizing that I'm suffering. The second step is, putting yourself within the context of humanity. And the third step is, and you can actually put your hands over your heart and feel the warmth. And that's what we were talking about before in terms of activating that caring system, right? You can put your hands on your chest. You can give yourself a hug. And you can say to yourself, what do I need to hear right now? What kindness can I show myself right now? What can I say to myself? Maybe you want to say, you're okay. You've done the best you can. I'm going to accept myself the way I am with all my flaws. I forgive myself. I am strong, right? Affirming statements that demonstrate to you the same kindness and concern that you would want to see from somebody else. The next tool that we can use is self-compassion journaling. And I believe that you would have been sent out, or you will be sent out, a worksheet sort of to work through this practice of self-compassion journaling. But just to outline it for you for a minute, you want to think of a situation that you you found yourself in at some point during the day that you felt bad about what happened, right? So similar to the self-compassionate break, you're bringing up that situation for yourself. And you want to just write down, like, what are the things that I felt bad about? What did I judge myself for? What is the experience that caused me pain? So that's step one. And then you want to use your mindfulness, your understanding of your humanity to process that event in a more compassionate way. So you want to create, what's the situation that caused me this pain, and how do I want to relate to it in a self-compassionate way by actually writing it out for yourself. And these are both activities that you can do, at any point in the day. You can set yourself a regular schedule for your self-compassion breaks, or do a nightly self-compassion journaling, right? These are things that, as I said before, it's a muscle we want to build. It's a skill, it's a tool that the more we do it, the more it will be incorporated into our mindset. Another example is, role playing a friend. So this is like really in the moment. This could be helpful to just think, like we said in the beginning of the webinar, what would a friend tell me right now? What would a friend say about this? That helps just in the moment on the ground to be able to shift into a self-compassionate mode. Another one is showing physical compassion. So like we did in the self-compassion break, at the end when we're using words of affirmation with a show of physical compassion, it's biologically activates our system to demonstrate compassion to ourselves in a physical way. So by putting your hands on your heart, by giving yourself a hug, right? By doing the physical acts, rubbing your arm, that somebody would be doing to you if they were showing you compassion. And that activates our mammalian care system on a biological level. It activates that compassion and that care and that concern that is so healthy for us. And the last is a self-compassion meditation. And I'm going to walk you through now, just for our last few minutes, an example of a compassion meditation that's specifically geared towards caregivers. So if you can, if you want to just sit back now and take a minute to close your eyes and imagine that you're in a caregiving context. Just imagine a real caregiving situation that you might have been in this week. Think about, what's that one of the caregiving situations that are very challenging for you, right? Normally we would do this in the context, right? We want to incorporate this in the context of our life, but in order to practice it, we're going to imagine that we're there right now. So imagine some of the stress and the difficulty that you are experiencing in this role at that moment, like feeling alone or tired, exhausted, overwhelmed, maybe a lack of a desire to be engaging in the caregiving activity at this moment. Allow yourself to feel all of your feelings without a right or a wrong. Maybe the feelings that you feel like you shouldn't be having, like anger or irritation or guilt over, not wanting to be involved in the activities. Just let everything arise for yourself. So what I'd like to do is, first I'm going to say some words of Akinardi to remind us that although we may seem superhuman, we have our limitations and we are only human. Just let these words drop into your awareness. Although we may seem superhuman, we have our limitations. We are only human. And now listen to these following words. Everyone is on their own life journey. I am not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it completely within my power to make it go away, even though I wish I could. Moments like these are difficult to bear, and yet I will try to help if I can. Just let these words settle into you. Start to notice your breathing, particularly your in-breath. Notice how your breath nourishes you and gives you the oxygen your body needs. As you breathe in, imagine you are breathing in compassion for yourself. You might also imagine a white or a gold healing light filling your body with each in-breath. As you breathe in the care and concern for your own struggle and the difficulty that you experience as a caregiver. With your in-breath, give yourself what you need. Perhaps that's strength, courage, peace, or simply compassion. With each breath in, just be there for yourself. And then now, focusing in your mind on the person you are caring for, the person who is suffering in their own way, call the image of this person to mind and what they are feeling, what they are going through. Think of their struggle and how challenging it must be for them. And now focus on the out-breath. And as you breathe out, imagine you are breathing out compassion for this other person, for their suffering and their difficulty. You might imagine that as you breathe out, you are filling their body with a golden and a healing light, using your breath to fill them with what they need: acceptance, peace, kindness. And now let's bring them both together so that as you breathe in for yourself, for your care. And as you breathe out for the other. So in for me and out for you. One for me and one for you. And if you like, you can adjust the ratio. So maybe your own stress and fatigue right now is really coming up for you. And you can feel free to breathe in more for yourself. So maybe 4 for me and 1 for you. Or maybe 10 for me and 1 for you. Just make sure you are always including yourself and the other to some extent in your breathing, in your circle of compassion. Remember that the source of this compassion is unlimited. It's a boundless ocean, more than enough for you and the person you're caring for. And once more, remembering these words, everyone is on their own life journey. I am not the cause of this person's suffering, and I don't have the power to make it all go away, even though I wish I could. Moments like these are difficult to bear, but I will try to help if I can. Slowly, as you breathe in and out, start bringing yourself back to the present. And remember these words. Everyone is on their own life journey. I'm not the cause of this person's suffering, and I don't have the power to make it all go away. Even though I wish I could, moments like these are difficult to bear, but I will try to help if I can. And these are words that you can continue to remind yourself at all times. They're words that you can write down for yourself in big, bold letters, where in a center of your house where you care for your loved one most or where you see the most. And this is a practice that you can use in the moments when you're with your loved one, to use your breath in those moments to cue your mind, to remind yourself that with that in-breath, I need to show myself compassion, that this is a hard moment. And with that out-breath, I want to remember my true intention of wanting to give care and concern to my loved one. And that just as the air around us is endless and our breaths can be endless, so too the compassion that we can show ourselves and others is endless as well. If you want more information about self-criticism and self-compassion. There's a clip on YouTube that I think really exemplifies these concepts of how harmful self-criticism is to us. It's here on the screen, Alfred in Shadow, a short story about self-criticism. You can find that on YouTube. And Christine Neff is really she's made it her focus in life to talk about self-compassion, and she has some guided self-compassion meditations, including the one that we just did on her website. So if you just Google Christine Neff self-compassion, you'll find that.
Great. Thank you so much, Mihal. Another great week, and sad to see that we only have 2 more weeks left, but really great information.